I wasn't looking for another woman. That's the first thing you need to understand. I was looking for an escape hatch, a quiet place to lick my wounds and pretend the last 2 years of my life hadn't been a spectacular, soul-crushing bonfire. The job posting had been a lifeline in a sea of algorithm-curated misery. Live-in nanny for 7-year-old boy, quiet household, remote location, privacy respected. It sounded less like a job and more like a self-imposed witness protection program, which was exactly what I needed. After Chloe, after the implosion of my art, my apartment, and my faith in my own judgment, quiet was the only currency I had left to trade in. The sprawling stone house was even more remote than the ad suggested, set back from a winding country road by a long gravel driveway that crunched like old bones under the tires of my beat-up sedan. Enormous oak trees, ancient and heavy with wisdom, formed a canopy that dappled the afternoon light, making the world feel hushed and secretive. It felt like a place where you could disappear. The air smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and the faint, clean scent of approaching rain. I stood on the flagstone porch, my knuckles hovering over the heavy oak door, my resume crinkling in my sweaty palm. This was it. A new chapter, a blank page, one where women, with their devastating smiles and promises that turned to ash, had no place. I was done with that. I was building walls, not bridges. The door swung open before I could knock, and my carefully constructed resolve evaporated like mist in the morning sun. She wasn't what I expected. The ad had been posted by an agency, the emails terse and professional, signed simply E. Albright. I had pictured someone severe, older, a woman in a starched suit with a tightly wound bun. But the woman in the doorway was soft. Not in a weak way, but in the way of worn river stones or old velvet. She was tall, with shoulders that spoke of carrying burdens without complaint, and her dark hair was pulled back in a loose, messy twist that had clearly been done with one hand while distracted. A few silver threads caught the light at her temples, defiant and beautiful. She wore a simple gray sweater, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, and dark jeans. No makeup, no pretense, just tired, intelligent eyes the color of moss after a storm. Her scent drifted towards me on the still air. Something clean and subtle, like sandalwood in old books. It was a scent that made you want to lean in closer, to understand its source. My heart gave a painful, traitorous lurch. "You must be Clara," she said. Her voice was lower than I'd anticipated, a calm alto that seemed to settle the very air around it. It was a voice you could listen to for hours. And that thought, that single, unwelcome thought, was the first crack in my new foundation. I had been in this house for less than 10 seconds, and my walls were already compromised. The initial days were a study in ishtihi, professional distance. I learned the rhythms of the house, which were dictated by two opposing forces: the chaotic, bright energy of her son Leo, and the quiet, gravitational pull of Ms. Albright herself. I called her Ms. Albright. It felt like a shield, a necessary formality that kept the treacherous terrain of first names at bay. She worked from a home office, the door always slightly ajar. Sometimes, as Leo and I built elaborate Lego castles in the living room, I'd hear the low murmur of her voice on a conference call, calm and authoritative. Then she would emerge for a cup of tea, her shoulders tight, a faint line of worry etched between her brows, and the professional armor would be replaced by the softer, more weary guise of a mother. She would ask Leo about his day, her moss-green eyes softening as he chattered about dragons and alien invasions. In those moments, I would feel an almost unbearable pang of something I refused to name. It felt like yearning, but I told myself it was just professional observation. I was the nanny. My job was to observe. I observed the way she held her favorite coffee mug, a heavy ceramic thing the color of a stormy sea, her long fingers wrapped around it as if for warmth. I observed the way she'd push a stray strand of that dark, silver-streaked hair from her face with the back of her hand, a gesture of unconscious grace. I observed the small, private smiles that would touch her lips when she was reading in the evenings, curled in a worn leather armchair by the fire, the light catching the elegant curve of her throat. I was a cataloger of her small human moments, and the collection was growing at an alarming rate. It was a dangerous hobby. Chloe had loved my observational skills. "You see things no one else does," she used to say, her voice a purr against my ear. She loved it until I saw the truth, the lies flickering behind her eyes, the way she touched other women with the same casual intimacy she reserved for me. My ability to see had been my downfall. So I tried not to see Eleanor Albright. I focused on Leo, on our walks in the woods, on the ridiculous voices I invented for his action figures, on the methodical task of making his peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, crusts cut off, just the way he liked. Leo was my anchor to the professional, the safe. He was a delightful, uncomplicated boy, with his mother's thoughtful eyes and an untamable mop of brown hair. He was easy to love. His mother was not supposed to be. "Clara, do you have a minute?" Her voice from the office doorway startled me one afternoon. Leo was down for his nap, and I was in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean, a nervous habit I developed. "Of course, Ms. Albright." I dried my hands on a dish towel, my heart rate picking up its familiar, annoying tempo. She gestured for me to come into the office. I'd never been inside before. It was organized but lived in, smelling richly of paper, coffee, and that faint, personal scent of sandalwood that was uniquely hers. Bookshelves overflowed, and a large architectural draft was spread across her desk, covered in notes written in a sharp, intelligent script. "Please have a seat." She motioned to the chair opposite her desk, but she didn't sit down herself. Instead, she leaned against the edge of the desk, crossing her arms. It created an immediate, if unintentional, power dynamic. Employer and employee. I clung to that distinction like a life raft. "I wanted to talk about Leo's schedule," she began, her tone all business. "His art class on Thursdays is being moved to a later time slot. I'm afraid it's going to conflict with my standing 4 p.m. call." I just nodded, waiting. "I was hoping," she continued, and for the first time, a hint of something other than professional efficiency entered her voice. Hesitation. "I know it's outside of your standard hours, but would it be possible for you to stay until 6 on Thursdays? I would, of course, compensate you for the extra time." It was a simple request, a logistical problem. But the way she asked, the way her eyes met mine, felt like something more. It felt like a test. Chloe had always tested me, pushing my boundaries to see how far they'd bend before they broke. "That's fine," I said, my voice flatter than I intended. "It's not a problem." A small, relieved smile touched her lips. It was a devastatingly beautiful thing. "Thank you, Clara. I appreciate it. It's been a challenge, juggling everything since—" She trailed off, looking away towards the window. "Since the divorce," I finished silently. She never spoke of him, but his absence was a tangible presence in the house, a ghost in the empty space beside her in the king-sized bed, in the single-place setting at the head of the dinner table. "I understand," I said softly, and the terrifying thing was, I did. I understood the loneliness that radiated from her in quiet waves. It was a frequency I was all too familiar with. I was supposed to be immune to it. I was supposed to be building walls. But with every small glance, every shared silence, Eleanor Albright was patiently, unknowingly, handing me the stones to build a bridge instead. The forced proximity of the house began to work its slow magic, eroding the edges of my resistance. Living under the same roof meant witnessing the unguarded moments that a 9-to-5 job would never reveal. I saw her pad into the kitchen late at night, her face illuminated by the stark glow of the refrigerator, looking for a snack she probably didn't need, her movements slow with exhaustion. I heard the soft strains of a melancholic piano piece drifting from her office long after Leo and I were in bed. We developed a silent choreography, a dance of two solitary people orbiting a small, bright sun named Leo. We learned the sound of each other's footsteps on the old hardwood floors, the specific creak of the stairs that meant she was coming down. For coffee, the soft click of my bedroom door closing at the end of the day. My awareness of her became a constant, low-level hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. It was the scent of her shampoo on the towel in the shared upstairs bathroom, a clean, herbal fragrance that made my chest feel tight. It was the sight of her reading glasses perched on a stack of books on the hall table, a small, intimate piece of her left out in the open. It was the sound of her quiet laugh, a rare and precious thing, usually coaxed out by something funny Leo said. That laugh was like a key turning in a lock I didn't know was rusted shut. I started to see the immense pressure she was under. She ran her own architectural firm, a detail I'd gleaned from the letterhead on her desk. She managed clients, deadlines, and the endless logistics of a complex business, all while trying to be a present and patient mother. There were days she emerged from her office looking pale and strained, the skin around her eyes tight with a tension she tried to hide from her son. On those days, I'd make sure the house was extra quiet, that dinner was ready a little early, that a fresh pot of the tea she liked was waiting on the counter. These were small, unspoken acts of caretaking. I told myself it was part of the job. A good nanny is attentive to the needs of the entire household. It was a neat and tidy lie, one that allowed me to place my hands on the warm mug I knew she would soon hold, to fold the laundry and catch the lingering scent of her on a sweater, to anticipate her needs in a way that felt dangerously close to intimacy. I was treading on thin ice, and I could feel it cracking beneath my feet. One rainy Tuesday, Leo and I were sprawled on the living room floor, deep in a project that involved more glitter than was strictly advisable. Eleanor came out of her office, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Headache," she murmured, more to herself than to me. She moved towards the kitchen. Without thinking, I got up and followed her. "I can make you some tea," I offered. "There's that peppermint blend you like." She stopped, her back to me, and for a long moment, she didn't move. "Thank you, Clara," she said, her voice quiet. "That would be nice." As I filled the kettle, my hands moving with practiced ease through the familiar space of her kitchen, I felt her watching me. It wasn't an employer's gaze, assessing my work. It was something else, something softer and more curious. I set the steaming mug on the counter, and as she reached for it, our fingers brushed. It was the briefest of contacts, skin against skin for no more than a second, but a jolt went through me, sharp and electric. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned. Her eyes, wide and startled, met mine over the rim of the mug. The air thickened, suddenly charged with everything unsaid between us. The rain beat a frantic rhythm against the window panes, mirroring the sudden, chaotic hammering of my own heart. In her gaze, I saw a flicker of the same surprised awareness I felt. It was a terrifying, exhilarating moment of silent acknowledgement. The professional distance I had so carefully cultivated had just been obliterated by a simple, accidental touch. We were no longer just an employer and her nanny. We were two women, alone in a quiet house, who had just felt the undeniable pull of a shared gravity. The lie I'd been telling myself, that this was just a job, had crumbled to dust. The shift after the tea mug incident, as I privately dubbed it, was palpable. The air in the house was different, humming with a new frequency. The silences between us were no longer comfortable. They were fraught with unspoken questions. We avoided looking at each other for too long, as if a sustained gaze might reveal too much. We were careful not to brush past each other in the narrow hallway. The house, which had once felt like a sprawling sanctuary, now seemed to shrink around us, forcing a proximity that was both thrilling and agonizing. My internal monologue became a relentless loop of her name. Eleanor. The name felt different now, stripped of its formal title. It felt like a secret I was keeping, a smooth stone I turned over and over in my mind. Eleanor, with the silver in her hair and the sadness in her eyes. Eleanor, whose rare smile could light up a room. Eleanor, whose touch I now craved with a desperate, self-destructive intensity. I was falling, and I had no idea how to stop it. The dam finally broke on a Thursday night. It was late October, and a fierce autumn storm was raging outside, rattling the window frames and sending branches scraping against the roof. Leo, who was usually a sound sleeper, had been woken by a particularly loud clap of thunder. He'd appeared in the living room doorway, a small, trembling figure clutching his stuffed dragon. I was on the sofa, trying to read, but mostly just listening to the storm and thinking about Eleanor, who was still in her office, trying to meet a deadline. "Clara?" Leo's voice was a tiny whisper. "I'm scared." I immediately set my book aside and held out my arms. "Come here, buddy." He scrambled onto my lap, burying his face in my shoulder. I could feel his small body shaking. "It's just the wind and the rain," I murmured, stroking his hair. "It can't get us in here. We're safe." Just then, the lights flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the room into absolute darkness. Leo let out a terrified yelp. "It's okay," I said, my own heart pounding. "It's just the power. We'll find some candles." A moment later, a beam of light cut through the darkness from the hallway. It was Eleanor, her phone's flashlight held high. Her face, illuminated from below, looked worried. "Is he okay?" "He's just scared," I said, my voice sounding shaky even to my own ears. She came over and knelt in front of the sofa. "Hey, sweet boy," she said softly, her voice a balm. She reached out and smoothed his hair. "It's a big storm, isn't it? But we're all together." She found some candles in a kitchen drawer, and soon the living room was filled with a warm, flickering glow. The shadows danced on the walls, making the room feel like a cozy cave, a safe haven from the raging world outside. We sat together on the floor, Leo bundled in a blanket between us, his fear slowly subsiding as he listened to the two of us talk in low, soothing tones. We talked about nothing and everything. Silly childhood fears, our favorite kinds of weather, the books we loved. The professional boundaries dissolved in the candlelight. We were just two people, keeping a little boy safe from a storm. At some point, Leo's head grew heavy and he slumped against his mother, fast asleep. Eleanor gently shifted him so his head was resting in her lap, her fingers stroking his back in a slow, rhythmic motion. The only sounds were the howling wind, the rain, and the soft crackle of the candle wicks. "Thank you, Clara," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was looking at me, her eyes dark and deep in the flickering light. "For being so good with him. For everything." "It's my job," I said, the words feeling hollow and false. "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "It's more than that. You're more than that." My breath caught in my throat. The air was thick with a truth that was finally, terrifyingly, demanding to be spoken. I thought of Chloe, of the sharp, brutal pain of her betrayal. I thought of the walls I had built, the promises I had made to myself. Stay safe. Don't feel. Don't let another woman get close enough to hurt you. But looking at Eleanor, at the quiet strength in her face, the vulnerability in her eyes, the gentle way she protected her sleeping son, none of those warnings mattered. The risk felt necessary. "I had my heart broken," I heard myself say, the confession spilling out of me raw and unbidden. "By a woman. It was bad. I came here to hide, I think, to stop feeling anything." Eleanor's expression didn't change. There was no shock, no pity, just a deep, unwavering acceptance. She simply listened, giving me the space to voice the fear I had held inside for so long. "I'm not hiding anymore," I whispered, the words tasting of freedom and terror. "I can't." She didn't speak. Instead, she slowly, deliberately, reached her free hand across the small space that separated us. Her fingers found mine, her touch gentle but firm. It wasn't an accident this time. It was a choice. A current of warmth spread from her hand up my arm, settling deep in my chest. She was an anchor in the storm, both outside and within me. Her thumbs stroked the back of my hand, a simple, profound gesture of comfort and connection. The storm raged on, but inside our candlelit cave, everything was finally, perfectly, still. The old pain was still there, a scar on my heart, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a wound. It felt like a part of a story that was not yet over. The morning after the storm was unnaturally bright and calm. The world outside was washed clean, glistening under a pale sun. Inside, the silence was heavy, filled with the memory of the night before, the candlelight, the confessions, the simple grounding touch of her hand. We moved through the morning routine in a haze of unspoken awareness. We made Leo's breakfast together, our bodies navigating the familiar space of the kitchen with a new careful grace. Every time our arms brushed, a spark ignited. When I handed her the syrup, our eyes met and held for a beat too long. The power was back on, but the electricity between us was far more potent. After I dropped Leo off at the school bus, I found her waiting for me in the living room. She was standing by the window, looking out at the damp sunlit garden, her arms wrapped around herself. "Clara," she said without turning around, "we need to talk." My heart plummeted. This was it, the part where she let me down gently, where she explained that last night was a mistake, a product of the storm and the strange intimacy of the blackout, the part where she reminded me that I was the nanny. "I know," I said, my voice tight. I walked over to the fireplace, needing something solid to lean on. "I crossed a line. I'm so sorry. It won't happen again. I can start looking for another job, if that's what you want." "No." The word was sharp, decisive. She turned to face me then, and the look in her eyes was not one of regret. It was one of fierce, startling clarity. "That is the last thing I want." She took a step towards me. "Clara, I haven't felt seen in a very long time. Not like this. Not since before my marriage ended, maybe not even then. I spent years trying to be what someone else wanted me to be. I built a life that looked right from the outside." Another step. She was closer now, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her moss-green eyes. "When you came here, you were so guarded. I understood that. I think I recognized it. But I also saw you. I saw the kindness you tried to hide. I saw the way you listen, the way you care for Leo as if he were your own. And last night," she paused, her throat working. "Last night, you let me see you too. My carefully constructed walls were gone, not knocked down, but gently, patiently, dismantled stone by stone. All that was left was the raw, vulnerable truth of what I felt for her." "I'm terrified," I whispered. "Me too," she breathed, and then she was right in front of me, her hands coming up to cut my face. Her palms were warm against my skin, her thumbs stroking my cheekbones. Her scent, sandalwood and books in her, filled my senses. It felt like coming home. "But I think," she said, her voice dropping to a husky murmur, her eyes searching mine, "this is a risk worth taking." And then she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of certainty, of relief, of 1,000 unspoken conversations finally finding their voice. It was soft and deep and tasted of coffee and morning and a future I hadn't dared to imagine. I wrapped my arms around her neck, pulling her closer, kissing her back with all the pent-up yearning and fear and hope that had been churning inside me for months. It wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of everything. When we finally broke apart, we rested our foreheads together, breathing the same air. Her hands were tangled in my hair. Mine were clasped at the small of her back. The house was quiet around us. "So," I said, my voice shaky but light, "what happens now?" A small, genuine smile played on her lips. "Now we figure it out." "I can't be your nanny," I stated, the reality of our situation settling in. It was a complication, a messy, unavoidable fact. "I can't kiss you in the morning and then have you pay me to watch your son in the afternoon. The power dynamic is impossible," she finished for me. I know. She didn't pull away. If anything, she held me tighter. "I'll start looking for a new nanny today, a proper professional one who won't fall in love with her boss." The words hung in the air, simple and profound. "And you?" she asked softly. "I'm not asking you to leave this house, just the job. Stay with me, Clara." It was a concrete plan, an action, not a vague promise, but a first step towards building something real, something that could exist outside the prescribed roles of employer and employee. It was a step towards equality, a step towards us. "Okay," I breathed, a dizzying sense of relief washing over me. "Okay." That evening, a call came from my sister, Sarah. Her name flashed on my phone screen, and a familiar knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I took the call on the back porch, watching the sky bleed into shades of bruised purple and soft pink. "Hey, you," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Just checking in. How's the hermit life treating you?" "It's fine, Sarah. It's quiet." "Yeah, well, quiet is good, I guess. As long as you're not getting into any trouble." The word was loaded, a direct reference to Chloe and the chaotic, painful aftermath of our breakup, the months I'd spent on Sarah's couch, unable to function. She meant well, but her worry always felt like judgment. It was the external pressure, the voice of a world that saw my love for women as a precursor to disaster. I looked through the glass of the kitchen door. Eleanor was inside, helping Leo with his homework at the table, her head bent close to his, the lamplight catching the silver in her hair. She looked up, and our eyes met. She gave me a small, questioning smile. A wave of warmth and fierce protectiveness washed over me. "Actually," I said into the phone, my voice clear and steady, a new strength in it that I hadn't had before. "I'm not in trouble. For the first time in a long time, I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." I ended the call before she could ask any more questions. The old fear, the shame that Chloe's betrayal had branded on me, was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, steady certainty. Over the next week, Eleanor was true to her word. She contacted the agency. She interviewed potential nannies, her voice professional and distant on the phone calls I discreetly overheard. It was a strange, surreal transition. During the day, I was still Leo's caretaker, but our nights became our own. After Leo was asleep, we would sit by the fire or on the porch swing talking for hours. I told her about my art, the passion I'd had for it before Chloe had convinced me I wasn't good enough. Eleanor listened, her gaze intent, and made me promise to show her my old sketchbooks. She told me about her own dreams, the ones she'd put on hold, a plan to design and build small, sustainable houses. She spoke of her ex-husband with a calm detachment, not bitterness, describing a slow drifting apart, a quiet erosion of a love that had never been quite strong enough to begin with. We were learning the shapes of each other's pasts, tracing the scars, and celebrating the small victories. The physical intimacy between us grew with the emotional. It was slow and tender, a hand held while we watched a movie, a lingering kiss in the hallway. One night, I woke from a nightmare, my heart pounding with the ghost of old anxieties. I found my way to her room, a shadow in the doorway. She simply lifted the covers, and I slid in beside her, burrowing into her warmth. She held me until I fell back asleep, my face pressed against her shoulder, breathing in her scent of sandalwood and safety. It wasn't about sex. It was about solace. It was about finding a safe harbor in another person's arms. The day the new nanny was set to arrive, a sensible-looking woman in her 50s named Carol, a nervous energy filled the house. I had packed my things, though Eleanor had insisted I just move them to the guest room. "This is your home," she'd said, leaving no room for argument. I was standing in the living room with my duffel bag at my feet, feeling adrift, when Eleanor came and stood in front of me. "This is the scary part, isn't it?" she said softly. "The part where it gets real." I nodded, unable to speak. "I'm scared you'll leave." "I'm not going anywhere," I promised, my voice thick. I had spent so long running from the possibility of being hurt again, building my life around the avoidance of love. But with Eleanor, the fear wasn't of being hurt, but of losing this incredible, terrifying, beautiful thing we were just beginning to build. She took my hand, her fingers lacing through mine. "Good," she whispered. The crunch of gravel in the driveway announced Carol's arrival. We stood there for a moment longer, hands clasped, a silent promise passing between us. We would figure this out. Together. That night, after Carol had settled in and Leo was tucked in bed, Eleanor and I sat on the back porch. The air was crisp and cool, smelling of wood smoke from a distant chimney. She had a sketchbook in her lap, one of mine, that I had reluctantly unearthed from the bottom of my suitcase. She turned the pages slowly, her expression thoughtful. She didn't offer empty praise. Instead, she pointed to a charcoal drawing of a twisted ancient tree. "This one," she said, "the way you captured the light here. It feels alive, like you understand its history." My throat felt tight. No one had ever looked at my work like that, as if it were a language they understood. Chloe had called it a cute hobby. "I haven't drawn in almost 2 years," I admitted. She closed the book and placed her hand over mine on the cover. "Maybe it's time to start again." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear in the deepening twilight. The roles that had defined us, nanny, employer, were gone, stripped away to reveal what had been underneath all along. We were just Clara and Eleanor, two women who had found each other in a quiet house at the end of a long road. The path ahead was uncertain, a blank page waiting to be filled. But for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was home. Have you ever had to choose between the safety of your solitude and the terrifying, beautiful risk of opening your heart to someone new? If our story of finding love in the quietest of places moved you, please show your support by liking this video, subscribing to the channel for more stories like this, and leaving a comment below to share your thoughts.